That's a nice view on the bay there.
It's been over 7 years since the Prey reboot was released, and since then, Arcane has gone on to release a game that was so good that IGN gave it a 10, and that game being Deathloop, of course. A hybrid sort of game that features roguelike elements with an emphasis on Arcane's signature immersive sim-style gameplay. The other game Arcane released was Redfall, a co-op looter shooter and a game that was so bad that it became a notorious stain on both Arcane and Xbox. Redfall was truly a victim of following gaming trends. The two games were complete polar opposites in terms of quality and critical reception. It's a shame really that we got Redfall instead of a sequel to Prey, which after my time with it has quickly become my favorite Arcane game and also one of my favorite games in general. In this video, I'll cover Prey in detail, and hopefully by the end of it, you'll be able to determine whether it's worth a buy for you or not. Real quick, a bit of self-promo. If you're into reviews, revisits, and retrospectives for both newer and older games, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Now let's get back to it. So I always start my reviews with a short overview of the developer, and Arcane Studios, of course, is a very well-known studio due to their catalog of hit games such as the Dishonored franchise, the second game of which was developed by Arcane Lyon, and this distinction needs to be mentioned as the studio since Dishonored 2 has split into two different locations, one in Lyon and one in Austin. Deathloop, the winner of many awards for its innovative gameplay, was also developed by Arcane Lyon. That means that Prey would go on to be Arcane Austin's first release, and the reboot did very well for itself, landing an 82 on Metacritic for its PC release. This would also cement Arcane Austin as being capable of carrying that torch forward. Unfortunately, Redfall would be up next for Arcane Austin, and it's worth mentioning that 70% of Austin's team, which had helped in developing Prey, was gone by the time Redfall's development was complete, and that is quite evident given the critical reception. Redfall attempted to cash in on what the gaming landscape looked like at the time, being a 4-player co-op looter shooter, none of which Arcane had any experience with. Unfortunately, due to the abysmal performance of Redfall, the Austin studio was closed, resulting in nearly 100 job losses. That means that Prey would go on to be Austin's one and only shining star and successful release. So I want to go back and give it a playthrough of my own. The story of Prey takes place in an alternate timeline. There's quite a bit of backstory involving the Soviet Union, the space race, an alien species known as the Typhon, but we'll mainly focus on where you, the player, comes in. You play the role of Morgan Yu, which can either be selected as male or female, who is recruited by their brother to join the TranStar research team on Talos 1, a space station that's orbiting the moon. Before leaving for the station, Morgan is subjected to a series of tests, and during one of those tests, the doctor in charge is attacked by a Typhon, and Morgan is subsequently knocked out as well. You wake back up in your apartment only to learn that everything you've experienced to this point, from waking up and conducting your daily routine to your commute to the station via helicopter, are all a lie, and that you've been living in a simulation, reliving the same day over and over again. I won't go much further into the story as I don't want to spoil the whole plot, but the first few hours of Prey are absolutely amazing and enthralling. Figuring out your place in the story, who you are, and what you've done to be in this position are a mystery of its own. How did you end up in this simulated environment? What was the purpose of being in one? And more importantly, how long have I been here? Those are all questions that the game slowly unveils answers to. Prey's environmental storytelling is some of the best I've seen in just about any game. Bits and pieces of the story can be stitched together through the various audio logs scattered across the station. Computers that the employees used are rife with information of the station's past and current status. Relationships can be dissected, and even the day-to-day lives of those who were part of the experiment, both as the scientist and the subject, can be learned. Arcane really does an amazing job giving the station a personality, making it feel lived in, and creating a sense of community within the station. But to be completely transparent, I have a hard time deciding whether I would recommend a playthrough for the story alone. See, most recently I played through the original BioShock, and that story in the game kept me engaged, and the moment-to-moment gameplay had every bit of effort devoted to progressing through and finding out what happens next. Prey is very different in that sense. The gameplay can take you anywhere at any time, and the story never felt like it had that sense of urgency behind it the same way BioShock Bioshock did, and similarly how some other games do. I would often get distracted from the main quest due to the various side quests that sometimes felt more intriguing than the main quest itself. Regardless, the main story is there, and it's decent, but recommending a playthrough of Prey would be because of the whole image rather than just the story itself. There are various choices you can make throughout the story that affect the type of ending you'll get, which gives it some replayability. I will say, however, the reason someone would play the game is not for that main story alone, but for the incredible detailed space playground that Arcane has created for you to experiment with. The meat and potatoes of Prey are its gameplay. This is where the game absolutely shines the brightest. Arcane is well known for the immersive sim-style gameplay, essentially giving you a playground to play in and a set of tools to make it all come together. We've seen this in games like Dishonored 1 and 2, and Prey has that same DNA written all over it. Of course, the game at its very core is a first-person shooter. You point, you click, and something eventually dies. The layers and layers of mechanics that Arcane stacks on top of this base are what make the game so great. At your disposal is a number of tools. For example, first you start out with a simple goo gun, and this particular gun is useful for freezing mimics and whacking them with a wrench, but you later learn that it's also helpful for putting out fires, allowing you to access areas that you previously couldn't. See, the best thing that Prey does is that it constantly evolves its gameplay. As you evolve by gaining new skills and abilities and also new tools, you create new ways to tackle enemies and new avenues for navigation. I'll be going in depth in Prey's skill system as it requires a section of its own to really understand the number of options at your disposal. The choices you have when approaching combat are numerous, and I'd bet that the way I approach the situation might be different than the way you do. Not because one of us is a better player, no, but more so because of the different ways combat can be handled. If you want to specialize in hacking and make turrets do the fighting for you, you can go for it. If you want to specialize in lifting heavy things and slinging them at enemies, that's also a valid approach. If you want to use your psi abilities instead of using your guns, that's also a great option, but don't mutate too much, because if you do, then you may find turrets identifying you as a Typhon. The list goes on and on. Your gameplay experience is pretty much tied to your own creativity. If you want to go for just a pure FPS experience and only use guns, that's totally possible too, and it's definitely a good approach, but it does take away from what Arcane has set up for you as a player. It's like Arcane is offering you a whole cake and you're basically just asking for a slice of it. With all that being said, Prey has become my favorite Arcane game. I truly believe the gameplay is Arcane at its very best. The amount of options at your disposal, the freedom granted to the player are really second to none. If there was ever a reason why someone would play through this game, it would be because of the gameplay. Progression in Prey is broken up in a couple of different ways. Neuromods serve as the primary way of becoming stronger and also becoming more proficient in a skill line of your choosing, that being from scientist, engineer, or security to begin with, opening up additional skill lines like psi power skills, for example, as you progress through the game. Working down the engineer skill line, you can open up more inventory space in order to haul around more weapons and crafting material. Spoiler alert, you'll definitely need additional inventory space. There are other skill lines that specialize in various gameplay mechanics, but for the sake of keeping this review somewhat short, I won't go through all the different upgrade options. It's worth mentioning that these upgrades directly affect gameplay in different ways. A good example would be finding a really heavy object and not being able to lift it. Well, if you spend enough points in a certain skill line, not only can you lift it, but you probably can open up an alternate path that was originally not seen, and you can also do some heavy damage by chucking that object at an enemy. I really did like the skill tree for what it is and its direct effect on gameplay. It felt great making that next big leap because I just knew it would evolve the gameplay for me in some shape or form. This is where the RPG layer of the game really kicks in and allows you to specialize in a certain set of skills, making your own playthrough unique. Aside from the skill trees, there are also chipsets that can be acquired. Like neuromods, these are normally found scattered around in hidden areas or at the end of side quests. There are two types of chipsets, one being for your suit and one being for your psychoscope. These usually help in granting passive buffs like decreasing EMP damage or increasing stamina regen. Some of these chipsets acquired are definitely more impactful than others, but overall they all give you the ability to customize your character's build to your liking and specialize in certain aspects of combat than others. And I should finally mention the weapon upgrade kit, which is used to help your weapons deal more damage, reload faster, among other options you have there. I do want to quickly highlight that the enemies in Prey are definitely some of the more unique ones I've encountered in any game. Specifically, the mimics These enemies can shapeshift into any mundane object from coffee mugs to trash cans and everything in between. Oftentimes you won't even see them coming at you, causing sheer panic when you go to pick up an item that is actually a mimic in disguise. There are a number of different types of typhons. Some of them are larger and more powerful, leading to a more cautious approach when coming across them. Others like to be more tricky, appearing and disappearing at will, and you'll even run into human-type enemies. Interestingly enough, the game has a mechanic that emphasizes using the right weapon in your arsenal to deal the most damage. See, each enemy has their own weaknesses and resistances, a piece of information that can only be uncovered using your psychoscope. This allows you to scan and learn what affects the enemy the most and make better use of what you have available. If an enemy is weak to EMP, then it would be a good idea to chuck a few EMP nades at them. If they're weak to psi, then hit them with a couple of kinetic blasts. This adds another layer of gameplay that I really liked. Without this system in place, then pretty much every enemy in the game can be approached the same way, which would have worked against the nature of the game itself. If the gameplay is the meat and potatoes, then the level design is the wine, or whatever food item goes really well. What I'm trying to say is the level design is incredibly well done and it complements the gameplay. I touched on this a bit earlier about how the space station feels lived in, and I really mean that. Every room in the game is designed with a purpose. Notes are scattered around. The signs of a struggle all across the space station are evident. The different biomes that even exist within the space station itself are great, as you'll travel through a greenhouse, you'll float through zero gravity areas, you'll rummage through laboratories and offices that once belonged to someone. Every situation can be approached differently. Above you, there could be a vent that allows you to get to the next room without alerting an enemy. To your side may be a heavy object blocking your path that can be moved if you're strong enough. There are a lot of nooks and crannies that the developers have jam-packed this game with, most of which I did not even notice my first time around. Just about every area of the game has interactable objects. Sinks can be turned on. Toilets can be flushed. I can go on for ages, but it's those little touches that give Prey that immersive feeling. The whole station is yours to make of it, and the level of freedom that Arcane gives the player complements the level design in a way that very little games can achieve. So let's wrap this review up. Overall, Prey is one of the best FPS games I've ever played. I've said it many times, but Prey is truly Arcane at its best. Being on Talos 1 felt tense. The ambient music that would kick in every now and then and added to the overall feeling of suspense. The gameplay is some of the best I've ever experienced. The myriad of ways any situation can be approached and dealt with allow for freedom that not many games are able to pull off. As previously mentioned, the story is a bit of a missed opportunity. I didn't find it particularly engaging, but the side stories and learning about all that has occurred on the space station propped the game up quite a bit for me. Progression systems were also really well done. Each upgrade tied into and also changed the gameplay was great. There's a DLC named Mooncrash, and this DLC is more like a roguelike than a run-of-the-mill story edition. I've heard great things about it, but I did not check out the DLC and I likely won't get to it before starting my next review. I'll also add this. If you didn't like Deathloop, I recommend checking out Prey anyway, as I personally didn't enjoy Deathloop much either, but found Prey to be fantastic. I cannot recommend Prey enough. I really think it's worth the playthrough for just about everyone. So that's going to wrap this review up. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit that like button. If you're new here, subscribe. I'll see you all in the next one.